Welcome everyone, and thank you all so much for being here today. We could not be more grateful to be in this space with all of you talking about revolutionizing probation from punishment to community-led safety. In a time when interdependent thriving feels so far away, it's critical for us to see where interdependent thriving is here among us. And so we can learn and understand how we can each play a role in growing it. And in the words of our amazing Kendra Vandewater, who we'll hear from today, some people say it's not possible to transform the system, but it is. Look at what we're doing already. And today's discussion gives us the framework for that transformation. We're digging into the soil of juvenile probation because the soil is the foundation for both health and harm. Understanding both the nutrients and the toxins is essential for growth, so we know what to nurture and what to remediate. And in the work of Philly, we can see what to nurture, so young people have an opportunity to flourish in safe communities. And our partners at the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies will share with us how to talk about this history, the reality of juvenile probation, and the alternatives to the current system. It is our delight to introduce our speakers today, who will share with us their wisdom, their experiences, and a pathway forward to interdependence. We're hoping all of you who are here with us will please share in the chat your name, where you're joining us from, and your role and your interest in this conversation. We also want to let you know that the Zoom platform has accessibility features available to anyone who needs them. When closed caption is turned on, participants will be notified. However, as we stated in our pre-webinar materials, we are not allowing third-party AI note-taking tools, and those will be removed. As you can see, we're going to be using the chat during the webinar, but if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And though we may not be able to answer all of your questions today, we hope through our Juvenile Probation Accountability Coalition, we can get to those questions, and we'll do our best to get to most of them today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. First, let me start with Heji Kim. Heji is the heart of this work at the Gault Center, and she is Senior Youth Defense Counsel, where she works to strengthen children's rights by ensuring that every child facing juvenile court stands with a zealous attorney fighting on behalf of the child. And her focus in our work is in developing policy and legal strategies to fight against the effects of structural racism in juvenile court systems. Next, you'll hear from our partners at Philly. Kendra Vandewater lives with the belief that challenging oppressive systems creates sustainable change. Kendra co-created Youth Empowerment for Advancement Hangout, Philly, a teen-led nonprofit focused on empowering teens and young adults in Philly who've been impacted by violence to achieve the lives they want and simultaneously reduce youth and community violence. Philly is a sustainable movement utilizing teen power to ultimately reduce neighborhood youth violence through community investment and implements programming specifically addressing the needs of teens and young adults according to them. And her partner, James A. James was born and raised in Philadelphia and has lived and worked in the same communities throughout his life. With an extensive background in behavioral health, case management, and providing wraparound services and advocacy for various populations, his expertise is ensuring people who continue to be oppressed by systems have access to cultural and quality supports. James is co-founder and co-CEO of Philly, which engages teens and young adults in West and Southwest Philly. And then it's a delight to introduce our partners, Dr. Denise Shervington, who has an intersectional career in public health and academic psychiatry. And I hope you'll read her full bio because it is such an impressive career serving communities and teaching so many about how to grow forward. Dr. Shervington is the founder of the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies, a community-based public health nonprofit organization domiciled in New Orleans, and she serves as the technical advisor and chief officer for mental health. She's the author of Healing is the Revolution, a guide to healing from historic, intergenerational, interpersonal, and community trauma. And she hosts the podcast Healing is the Revolution, in which guests share and explore the healing journey through trauma. And finally, Iman Shervington. Iman is the Senior Director of Media and Communications at the public health nonprofit, the Institute of Women in Ethnic Studies. She's also the founder of 15th Point, a consulting firm that works at the intersection of media, design, and communications, where she's worked with a variety of entities from universities to nonprofits to health equity advisors. Iman has extensive experience in narrative change, strategic communications, and brand strategy, community engagement, and community engaged practices. She has also won numerous awards for her work. You can see all of their full bios in our chat, and we couldn't be happier to be joined in conversation with them today. And we'll start with our very own Heji Kim. Thank you all so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much, Marianne. I am so thrilled to be here today in just such wonderful company to talk about shifting probation from punishment to community-led safety. So my portion of today's conversation is really going to be to walk through the key findings of our upcoming report that we will be releasing with Yafili very soon. So our report is called Revolutionizing Probation, and it's part one of a two-part series that sets the stage around our why behind the need for probation transformation. And we do this in our report by examining two things. One is what young people are saying about their experience on juvenile probation. And two is by looking at the history of juvenile probation so that we can examine these underlying narratives that's propelling this system. And because you all joined us for today's conversation, as a thank you gift, we are actually going to share a sneak peek early access link to our report and our executive summary in the chat at the end of the webinar. So please stay tuned for that at the very end. And just as a heads up for what is to come later on this year, we are planning on releasing part two of our report, and that's going to cover concrete strategies and examples of ways that defenders, probation officers, and community leaders are already building toward a future where we move away from punishment and toward possibilities for all youth. So, with all of that said, here is our flow for today's webinar. Today, we're essentially going to cover the why, the what, and the how. So I'm going to be covering the why behind the need for change, which again is an overview of our report that's upcoming. And this is really just the start of today's conversation, because this effort is not just about identifying the problems with juvenile probation, but it's really about what we can create together instead. Right? What are the alternatives that we should be investing in, paying attention to, and growing so that when we say things like we want to support positive youth development or we want to see young people thriving in communities, we can actually start visualizing what that looks like. And I can't think of a better duo than Kendra and James to walk us through that piece. And then we're in for a double treat because we'll have narrative experts, Dr. Denise Shervington and Aman Shervington, walk us through some narrative strategies around how we can talk about juvenile probation and the need for change in a way that's compelling and persuasive for decision makers. So, with all of that, let's talk why. And I actually want to start just by touching on really quickly why this work matters to the Gault Center. Many of you are familiar, but the Gault Center is a national organization dedicated to supporting lawyers who represent young people in juvenile court. And we do this by growing and seeding litigation strategies, advancing national and state policy, and serving as a bridge or a connector across advocates to shape collective action for systems change. And as part of our work, we have been invited into over a dozen counties over the years to really take a critical look at probation orders. And we've talked to decision makers, defenders, young people, and families to identify areas to align probation practices with adolescent development, due process, and racial justice principles. And through our work, we have seen this normalization of the everyday constitutional deprivations and surveillance that young people face in the juvenile probation system. And we have seen a pretty active probation to prison pipeline, right? Through the use of incarceration for technical violations of probation, which cause lasting harm for young people. And our perspective is that so long as these systems of punishment continue to exist, the Gault Center fundamentally believes in the power of lawyers to disrupt injustices inside the system, uphold the rights of young people, and work in partnership with communities to create meaningful and as many off-ramps as possible for young people that lead to community-based safety and healing for all youth. And all of this shapes our organizational lens and our why behind the Juvenile Probation Accountability Coalition and our beautiful partnership with YAFLE. So with that, I want to now turn to our collective why. And I want to start talking about the juvenile probation system as a whole. And really first examine this first question of what is the purpose of this system? And to answer this question, I'm actually going to point us to Donella Meadows, who was a scientist and systems thinker. She was part of a team at MIT that invented this concept of system dynamics, which is the study to understand complex behaviors so that we can precisely identify how to create the change that we want to see in systems. All that to say, she's a systems expert. Now, bear with me for just a minute, but Donella Meadows explained that the way we figure out a system's true purpose is by taking a look at its behaviors. She says the best way to deduce the system's purpose is to watch for a while to see how the system behaves, because purposes are deduced from behavior, not from rhetoric or stated goals. So I want to just sit on this point just for a little bit. And I actually am going to invite everyone to join me in reflection in the chat. So please get your keyboards ready because I want to hear your thoughts on this first question. In your jurisdiction, in just a couple words, what is the stated purpose of juvenile probation? Right? So feel free to start dropping your reflections in the chat, right? So this can be what's written in your state code about the purpose of probation, right? So I see a lot of rehabilitation, like quote rehabilitation, right? So like, what are the things that probation officers or judges say is the purpose of probation? Yeah, lots of rehabilitation, supervision, see some to monitor and supervise youth, to act in the best interest of children, support, service navigator, treatment, yep, community safety, youth accountability, and rehabilitation. All right. Yeah. Okay. So yes, a lot of rehabilitation, treatment, community safety, restorative justice to prevent juveniles from coming back into the system. All right. So now I want to ask a second question, which is on the flip side, I want to ask, like, what have you observed to be the common behaviors of the juvenile probation system, right? So this question is really like, how does in actuality, despite whatever is written about the stated purpose, how does the juvenile probation system treat young people and their families based on what you've seen, what you've heard, or what you've experienced? Yeah, so let's see. We have overbearing, stringent, punitive, creates further criminalization, surveillance, facilitates public safety without dignity and suspicion. Yeah, absolutely. Over surveillance to dehumanize, ranges from abusive to apathetic supervision. Yep. So right. So a lot of punishment, expecting young people to be brave, better than mature adults, ignores trauma. Right. So look, just to add a layer onto this, I want to add that this is like the observed behaviors of the system. They're not too far off, right, from what young people are also saying about their experience on probation. In fact, here are just a couple of reflections to add on to all of your reflections on what young people have shared with us about their experience on probation as part of our report. So we had one young person say, probation put me in a constant state of fear, like I was being watched, right? And a lot of you shared that as well, the monitoring aspect of the observed behaviors of probation. Another youth said, everything you do is like you're getting monitored, like you're on a leash. And another youth said, I was depressed about the fact that I may just end up back in jail, and that took its toll on me. So, based on this input, right, we find in our report that young people are experiencing juvenile probation as a system that surveils, that controls, and that punishes. So, with all of these reflections that you all shared and what young people are sharing, have shared with us, what all of this reveals to us, right, is that fundamentally there is a dichotomy between what the system is more broadly saying about itself. So we saw a lot of rehabilitation in the stated purpose, right? Versus the actual behaviors that the system is producing, right? And naming this divide is really important because it gets us just a step closer to more precisely targeting what it is that needs to change and why. And I want to take us just a layer deeper to examine a little bit more of like what's underlying this divide. And to do this, first, I want to explore this idea that all systems exist within a larger social and historical fabric, right? In fact, Donella Meadows says, if you really want to understand the systems that you want to change, watch it work and learn its history. So, taking this direction, I want to now turn to the history of the juvenile probation system. And our intention is that we can understand what dominant narratives have been controlling and swirling around probation over time so that it can shed some light around this dichotomy that we're seeing, right, between the actual behaviors versus the stated rhetoric. So, let's talk history. In super broad strokes, right, the very beginning structures of the juvenile legal system first formed in 1825 when New York opened the first house of refuge. Then in 1841, this idea of probation was first born in Massachusetts, and it turned into law for the first time in 1878 in the same state. Then in 1899, Chicago, Illinois opened the first juvenile court in recognition that kids are different, right? Now, most of you are probably familiar with some form of this origin story. It's this twin rhetoric of rehabilitation that we see carried across both systems, the juvenile court system and probation, that we still hear today. But now I want us to take a look at what else was happening in our country during this time and after this time. Because systems don't exist in silos, right? They exist within a larger social and legal context, which then shapes and informs their behaviors. So, first, as these twin systems of rehabilitation were being formed, Black children and adults in our country were enslaved. Meaning, probation and the juvenile legal system, they were formed within a legal infrastructure that upheld hierarchies and oppression based on race. In fact, this was during a time when the US Supreme Court declared that our Constitution did not apply to Black Americans. Now, the first juvenile court was created in 1899, which was after the 13th Amendment. But the dominant rule of our land during this time was that racial segregation and unequal treatment were constitutional, right? Under the premise that separate but equal satisfied the 14th Amendment. And this law under Plessy v. Ferguson was good law until 1954 in our country. Now, again, what that in essence allowed for as it relates to the juvenile legal system and probation is that it normalized and maintained a system of discrimination, right? Of differential treatment and unfair treatment of youth based on their race. And we saw this play out. We saw it through the Black Codes, which are basically vague criminal laws that were paired with convict leasing mechanisms to preserve the forced labor practices even after the 13th Amendment, continuing until the 1930s, right? And from the 1930s to the 1950s, we saw the juvenile legal system being used to project state-sanctioned racial violence at the height of the Jim Crow era. Then we moved from the 1950s to the 1970s, and we saw the juvenile legal system and probation being formally used to suppress civil rights activities, right? Thousands of Black youth were arrested for protesting, and many probation orders during this time included explicit conditions for youth not to associate with the civil rights movement or freedom leaders or else face incarceration. Then in the 1970s to the 1990s, we saw the war on crime and the war on drugs really turbocharge mass incarceration, targeting Black and Latina communities. And then, of course, layered onto this during this time, we as a nation were driven by two narrative myths that fed into each other, propelled by two criminologists who both actually later retracted their assertions. So the first is the Martinson Report, which claimed that, quote, nothing works when it comes to rehabilitation, calling for far harsher punishment. And this importantly influenced and was followed by John DeLeo's super predator myth, right, which we know was racially coded language to target and more harshly punish Black and Latina youth. And what all of this left us with up to this point is a system that has a lot of muscle memory of serving up racial bias and racial harm. In fact, since 2005, we've made a lot of progress as a country to shrink the size of the juvenile legal system, and yet data shows that we still treat children differently based on race, with some states seeing increases in racial disparities. And it's in this social and legal context that reveals that juvenile probation as a system has actually existed within this unbroken lineage of racialized social control. And knowing that and naming it contextualizes just a bit more, right, how and why this system is intimately intertwined with these dominant narratives that devalue the lives of youth of color. And when we name that, the actual behaviors that you all shared in the chat, right, and that young people are sharing about their experiences, they all start making a lot more sense. And look, admittedly, this is a lot. And our hope for doing doing this look back into our past, is to quote Bryan Stevenson, not to punish, but rather to offer a path toward liberation. Right? If we truly want to change the overall negative behaviors of the system that, frankly, most people in a room can agree we do not want as a society, right? Looking at this structural history and challenging these underlying narratives that have been producing these behaviors over time is a really important starting point that begins to help shape our collective why. In fact, to continue on with what Bryan Stevenson had recently said, he said, there is an America that is more free, where there is more equality, where there's more justice, where there's less bigotry. And I think it's waiting for us. But I don't think we can create that America while we remain burdened by this history that too many refuse to talk about, that too many refused to acknowledge. And it's on this note that I want to end on a message of hope. And that is that our intention behind all of this, right, the Juvenile Probation Accountability Coalition first, is in recognition that no one person or one entity can take all of this on. And at the same time, there is a role that everyone can play, right, regardless of what hat you wear in or out of the system. So JPAC is our recognition that we need to continue to grow and work in communities that share in this collective why that is rooted in a true accounting of our history, and to lean into our collective power that we can create together. And second, right, what we're trying to continue to grow, again, is not just to point to the bad things of a system and say that needs to change. While certainly that's important, right? But it's equally about pointing to the beautifully good things that are already underway in our communities, right? To build towards systems that produce the behaviors that we all want to see. Community safety and young people thriving, right? Shaping their own dreams and their futures and reaching their best potential in communities that genuinely care about them. And importantly, a system that does not treat those two things as mutually exclusive. So it's on this note that I am filled with utmost delight to turn it over to our dear friends Kendra and James, who through their organization at Philly is not only a living embodiment of genuine care for young people, but their work has proven that public safety is indeed achieved when we care for the thriving and flourishing of all youth. So Kendra and James, turning it to you.
Thank you, Hedgie. Okay. So I know that Hedgie asked a question. We had a similar question. We saw all the answers, so we will skip through. But my name is Kendra Vandewater. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Youth Empowerment for Advancement Hangout, also known as Yeah Philly. Go ahead, James.
I'm James A. I'm also the co-founder, and it's a privilege to have you all join us on this webinar.
So we are the part two of we will be focusing on our model as an alternative to incarceration, and we can get started. So we will skip this question. Oh no. Hold on, give me 1 second. It's not going.
So I think while Hedgie mentioned the juvenile probation system was formed during tough times for majority of people of color. It was a time frame where majority of the values and these systems that was created were rooted in slavery and oppressing Black people. While that system still continues, our organization, Youth Empowerment for Advancement Hangout, or YIT Philly, was established during a time where there were uprisings and young people started to have a voice to push back. So the history of who we are and what we'll be presenting on is very intentional and to counter what these systemic harms have caused for us.
I'm sorry, give me a second because our slides are not advancing. I'll just play it from here. Okay, here we go. So we can start by giving you a history of Yeah Philly. We were created in 2018 to elevate youth experiences in our communities. James came from a hospital violence prevention program. I came from working with the city of Philadelphia at the Police Advisory Commission and a homicide initiative. And so we wanted to create something based on what we were seeing in the city at the time around a certain population of young people who were not receiving a service, but they were also being called some of the people who were committing some of the most violent crimes or being nuisances in our communities in our city. So, yeah, Philly acknowledges the lack of services for young people who were caught in the cycle of violence. We provide services for young people who do not receive traditional support. We have always been known as an organization that challenges the status quo about how we treat young people and how we talk about young people. And we utilize direct services to push legislation and make transformational change. And we also address root causes of violence and we advocate against racism and harm. And so we are very outspoken about the things that happen, not just in our city and our state, but all across the country. And we want to make sure that we are addressing the things that oftentimes are not discussed or talked about when services are being provided for young people. Go ahead, Jane.
Some of the gaps in the current systems that we all know is that our systems are designed to surveil young people with no services. This system, from what we know of here in Philadelphia, is focuses on punishment, even for activities not related to the actual charge. There's plenty of our young people who are juvenile probation is extended because they have poor grades without an IEP, or they have behavioral health issues that should be addressed through community and not through punishment. Um, One of the biggest things through our focus groups is revealed what we already know is that there is no support or opportunities that a system like juvenile probation can provide that communities cannot offer. And all of our young people who have been in a system or have a history of being arrested or the ones who are currently involved as well, they always echo the same thing. I just need support. Not necessarily from people that look like me, but I just need a support system that can understand me, that can offer me some stability, and most importantly, just opportunities that extend beyond a time frame, which is typically presented by juvenile probation.
And one of the things I'll bring up is that I know everyone's from all over, different cities, different states. One of the biggest things that we see with juvenile probation is that their rules are very unclear. Young people do not receive a lot of things in writing. It's a lot of word of mouth. It's a lot of I call you and tell you what to do. And so things are not clear. And for young people whose brains are still developing, they need very clear rules, they need clear structure, and they need someone that they can talk to and depend on, when they do mess up, because young people are going to mess up. We as people, we mess up all the time. And so for us, juvenile probation does not provide incentives to do better. And also, there is no incentive to do good. And so when child development things happen and normal child development things that happen, whether it's a curfew violation or whether someone didn't go to school or whether they missed an appointment, these are normal things that should not require punishment. So we are looking at a system that in the beginning, as Hedgie talked about, is stated to say that they are supposed to be helpful and focus on treatment and rehabilitation. But in reality, this system is not focusing on that for kids. So this is always some of the same things that are reported by young people, what young people actually need. And yeah, Philly has served over 600 young people per year. We work with young people ages 15 to 24, and we focus on those who are charged with a gun or a violent crime. And we have a program called the Violent Crime Initiative that was launched in January 2021. It has been evaluated by Temple University. And a lot of the things that have come out of this is that the young people specific to this population actually need things that are very different than what is being offered by various services or by the city government.
And what that typically looks like is, and it's our first point, is fierce advocates. And we know that traditionally an attorney in a courtroom feels that they're an advocate, a social worker feels they're an advocate, but sometimes that needs to be taken a step further where we know that there may be consequences or pushback, but our young people expect us to speak up and have a voice for them when they feel scared or oppressed. The consistent relationship, meaning that, far beyond the services being provided, we should not be closing them out because of they've been discharged out the system or but they still have unmet needs. Young people know they need more opportunities to regroup in case they make a mistake because they understand they're not perfect. And we all know brain science clearly states that, young people's brains aren't fully developed until closer to 30 years old. We always offered safe spaces at our organization because we know that when a young person is having, some hardships, whether it's at home or in school, being able to have a space where they can come and relax and do nothing or come and relax and engage, has been part of the biggest success stories for some of our young people. And young people need money. If none of the activities or opportunities connect to some type of financial gain, sometimes it doesn't serve the purpose. So economical opportunities such as jobs, internships, those are essential. And one of the most important pieces is mental health support. Young people have the opportunity to engage in treatment, but typically it's how it's presented. It's presented through a court order, or it's presented through a relative that said you need to do this. But being able to have young people involved in the whole process from identifying why I need this, why this may be helpful, all the way to the point where they make the initial call themselves to be connected.
And advocacy is one of the core focuses of our organization. We get the most done because of how strong our advocacy is. We get the most results because of how our staff advocate, how we advocate for young people. And so we want to make sure that regardless of where the young person is, if they're on juvenile probation, if they're going to school, if they're in the house, if they're receiving mental health services, advocacy is a really big point that everyone should understand that they have to be fierce advocates in order to get things done in the way that young people need them done. And I do want to say too that we do not mandate any young person in our program. We get referrals from all over, whether that be probation officers, law enforcement, judges, lawyers. You can self refer, but we do not force young people to do anything. And we believe that our outcomes are higher because young people have choices in what they do.
One of the things I do want to add, for those of you who are attorneys, we have a model where we've been able to, staff our own criminal defense attorneys, and our attorneys also do the advocacy work and the community work for their clients. So they are in the courtroom, identifying potential needs, but then also outside of the courtroom, they're making sure that that young person gets a permit, gets their vital documents, have access to financial gains, have a bank account, building that type of relationship. So that way it's more than just being represented in the courtroom. It extends far beyond that.
And so we are known as a community-based alternative, and we focus on support, we focus on opportunity, relationships, progress, and harm reduction. There's a narrative going around, specifically in our city, I can only speak for Philadelphia, that everyone should be anti-violence. We focus on harm reduction because we know that just because a young person is in a program does not mean they're magically going to stop doing something. This is part of human behavior, and then this is part of what we do. Everyone also likes to discuss recidivism. People also don't understand everything that goes into recidivism, but we want to always highlight the progress that young people have made, whether that be in 30 days, 60 days, 2 days, it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, our research has shown that by the time a young person is referred to Philly, they have been arrested 4 times. So we are getting young people who cycle in and out of the same system over and over. They've been through program after program and they have a whole lot of unmet needs. We have the young person who is disconnected from schools, disconnected from family. They don't have a lot of family support. They're often being raised by grandma. A lot of them have multiple siblings. They are fending for themselves. They're out here surviving on their own. They don't have a lot of educational resources. So we provide a holistic service to help put young people on a path to self-sufficiency, but also understanding that there are going to be setbacks, there are going to be mistakes. And that is why we don't focus on punishing, we don't focus on surveillance, and we give young people the choices to do not what they want, but make their own choices in their lives and they have their own consequences. So for an example, if you choose not to go to school, we can't get you off of the ankle monitor, right? We can't advocate for you to do all of these things if you're not pulling your weight and doing your part too. We incentivize, we provide a lot of support around housing needs, bedroom furniture. So we make sure that we are addressing needs according to that young person.
So what Year Fully does, right? We always acknowledge our young people as the expert of their lives. As Kendra mentioned, young people are able to make the decisions, and sometimes it may be poor decisions, but we believe in natural consequences. But it also opens up space for conversations. We believe young people should be paid, not just to learn skills, but different milestones that they've obtained throughout their life. So it may be a young person, for example, today who failed his driving permit several times. Today he passed it and he was incentivized. And we know that this not only builds relationships, but it motivates and encourages young people to kind of think forward. And it kind of separates them from the population they typically were around that does nothing but just waste time in an unproductive way. Um, we protect our young people. We do not believe in calling the police. We do not believe in reporting any information that may cause harm to our young people. And they know that and they feel the love, and that's the same thing they project back to us. We know that almost 50% of shootings in Philadelphia result from an argument. So we know that our young people need to figure out different strategies and models to resolve any conflict. So we provide conflict resolution and mediation training. And we are moving towards a space where we can offer that like monthly instead of quarterly. Leadership and development. Young people have a mindset of, I want to work for myself. I want to be an independent contractor. I want to be an entrepreneur, but they don't have the skills to be able to work for someone else, or even learn from someone else. So a lot of these things are what we prep young people for. We help mold them so that way they can be successful, not just to get out the juvenile system, but just to be successful holistically throughout the rest of their life. We believe in making sure all of our young people feel safe in all their spaces in their community. And they're allowed to make mistakes, as Kendra mentioned, but we also don't set all the consequences. We are only able to control the narrative pieces around our own space. So if a young person, for example, gets into a fight with another participant, right? Like there is a restorative process that we allow, and we will not kick somebody out of anything. We do not kick anybody out of programs, even if it's something resolving involving causing more harm to another participant. And we believe young people should have the ability to make choices and follow through with it. And we hold them accountable for those things. And I think that's what makes our model a lot different than what we see across the country right now.
And the last thing I'll add is that about a third of our staff are young people who have come through the program. About a third of our staff are under 26 years old. And so we want to make sure that we are hiring people who understand this work. And we see that young people who have come through the program and have been interns and also are now full-time staff are our best staff. So we have a second poll, what works? Well, our first poll, what works? In your opinion, what improves youth outcomes most? We see people, care, love, understanding, time, freedom, community, resources, contact, support. So a lot of people are saying resources and support. Good. Access, knowledge, approach, individualized contact, mentorship, understanding, stability, hope, mental health, genuine care. Ooh, so many good ones. So when we're thinking about talking about the history of juvenile probation and how it actually operates in our communities, from our perspective, we are not seeing these things coming out of juvenile probation, which is why, yeah, Philly continues to grow, expand, and try to help as many young people as possible get out of the system. Because these things, all of these things you are labeling are very important, and they are what young people need most. So we can talk about why Yeah Philly works. Yeah Philly is an organization that is funded by over 54 different funding sources. We do have government funds, we have private foundation funds, multiple sources of funding, but it works also because we are able to meet young people's needs in real time. We meet immediate needs, short-term, long-term needs, and how we spend our money and invest in young people is very important. It's very different than how systems operate. Sometimes it takes extremely long for somebody to get a service, whether it be from the government, whether it be from another organization. But part of why we operate differently is to reduce barriers as much as we can to help provide resources to people in real time so they don't have to wait forever. We build trust and relationships. Trust is one of the largest things of our organization. We are trusted by young people. We are those trusted adults. And if a young person does not trust you, you are not going to know all of the information that you could. So, this is very important to us. And it's another reason why we stand intentionally independent from systems because we would not be able to do the work that we did if we turned over data to law enforcement, if we turned over data to people that continue to harm young people. So while it's seen as adversarial, it's not us trying to be adversarial. It's us trying to protect young people and provide a service that we know is extremely important to this population. We reduce isolation and stress. We have spaces, we own multiple offices, but we have a space where young people can come, even if it's just to get out of the house because you're on house arrest. They are able to be around peers. They are able to interact with our staff. They're able to hang out and do nothing, but they're also able to do laundry or take a shower or eat a meal or play PlayStation, attend school at our space. So, this is important as well. We create real pathways forward, and we don't offer a lot of one-off things because we like to focus on how do we not just, as James said, get young people out of the system, but how do we put them on the path to be able to create a life that they want and deserve. And we talked about the fierce advocacy. And we also talked a little bit about challenging racism, harm, and systems. We are very well known in our city and beyond for how we challenge and confront juvenile court. We are not liked for that. We advocate against harm all the time. It does not matter who you are or what you do. We will advocate with the young person and in the best interest of young people. And we also challenge more people to stand up against the systems that cause harm regardless of who you are, because these are the things that dismantle the way that things are done. And we need to be able to protect young people and provide a service that they really need.
And I think one of the key points that add to what Kendra mentioned is like the way our organization function. We do believe that time is important when a young person is referred to us, which is typically by another young person. Addressing all of those things immediately is essential. So if a young person identifies they need, in day one, I need a phone, I need a bed, I need food, my electric cut off, my gas cut off, day one, all those things get addressed. And that is something that we know that most systems don't have the capacity or just don't want to do. And for us, that's just a model that we all always utilize. And I think that's our path moving forward with change when it comes to young people.
So we also focus on accountability without carceral punishment. There's a narrative in society that if you do something wrong, you should be punished automatically. Philadelphia charges a lot of kids as adults, even though we have reduced the juvenile population. Pennsylvania is one of the highest incarceration rates in the Northeast, and we have one of the highest rates of young people on probation and under supervision. So while we're saying these things that we're doing in real life, it is not actually happening, and we know who is often on probation and incarcerated. It is mostly Black and brown youth. So we focus on accountability without punishment. A lot of people come to us and say that accountability has to be law enforcement, but it does not. We believe in restorative justice. We believe in accountability as in showing up for community, repairing harm. We believe in strength and growth focus and consequences, investing in people in real time, and earning and incentivizing. Even today, there was a young person here who is very behind in school. He was not in school when he was referred to us. He's in school now. He came to Philly to do his school. He was behind in his assignments. We're like, look, do you need a stipend to help you be able to get through school? And these are the things that we want to make sure that young people are able to earn. Because if school is such a problem, which it is for a lot of the people that we work with, which is also why we have instituted a literacy program, because we want young people to be able to get through things. And sometimes they're going through so much that they shouldn't be as young people and as kids. And they're going through all of these adult problems. So they need different types of support. So accountability looks different for everyone. Um, Growth looks different for everyone and incentives look different for everyone, which is why we want to make sure that our support is individualized and not blanketed across the organization. But regardless, we do not believe in carceral punishment. We do not believe that kids should be in jails or prison. We do not believe that kids should be charged as adults. Period. End of story. You want to take that, James?
So community violence intervention, right? And the goal and what that should provide, right? We know that the goal is always to interrupt cycles of violence. And sometimes, one of the stories I'll share is majority of our young people who are in the juvenile system, they are often bundled with other young people that they already have problems with. So whether that's a court order program or shared court dates and just being in those environments. Those are the harms that we see that system creating. So for us to kind of step in and get involved, we're able to kind of navigate and coordinate and interrupt like that part of the cycle of violence. And our people feel a lot safer, right? And in real time, young people want to feel supported and loved. And that's time consuming to some extent, but I think it's something that all of our young people are obligated to. So having the right people in the right places to offer that, so that way it is authentic and it's real. Um, Providing alternatives to system involvements. As Kendra mentioned, some of our young people are here for during their school time. Sometimes they are court ordered to very specific programs, but we have to advocate and say that is not what this young person needs. So as an alternative, they'll be at our organization so that we can focus on all of the things they actually need, which is always connected to root causes. And again, it might be just needing a space for a mental break. It might be just being able to have a space where you can say, these are the things that I actually need. And my friends don't need to know about it. My mom don't need to know about it. But I'm in a space of vulnerability where if you can support me with these things, a lot of my behaviors might change, my patterns might look a little different, and I probably succeed and be more so towards that path for self-sustainability. Developing young people as leaders to reduce violence. Majority of our young people have the opportunity to be on different boards. We're in a process of starting our own youth advisory committee to help co-create different spaces so that way young people can have alternatives to different things they typically do after school, which in Philadelphia there aren't many opportunities outside of like sports and anything related to academics. And just not feeding information to law enforcement. Like most folks will say that yeah, Philly is anti-police. We actually just never believed in the model, and we know that that model will never change, so we can't support anything close to that. And there are times where law enforcement want to be able to provide us funding and support, but we know that it comes with shared information, so we always have to reject those things.
So we are coming to time almost, and we have one more poll for you, and then we'll close with a couple more suggestions. Here's the last poll. Should the topic of juvenile probation be labeled as a public health issue? This is my favorite question, especially as a person with a degree in public health, and also part of why we are working to create this coalition related to this issue. And if you are not sure, I think this is a great topic to talk about what a public health issue is. And it is an issue that affects and impacts a population of people. And we believe that it should be studied, which is why we're doing this work. And there should be solutions to how juvenile probation operates, which is why it should be labeled, in our opinion, as a public health issue. So I'm going to We talked a little bit about that. So what this means for your role, we have about 2 minutes left. We would like judges to reduce reliance on probation. Our staff has started going to court and also saying that regardless of young people being on probation, yeah, Philly has provided all of the services. The services that probation say that they provide, they actually do not. They do not help young people go to school. They do not provide mental health services. They do not provide mentorship. They provide surveillance and monitoring. So we have been getting a lot of people off of probation because the services remain whether probation is there is not, and it's been working. So judges should rely less on probation. Government and probation, they should shift towards a support-based model and change policies. There was a recent report in Philadelphia where it showed less than 2% of the juvenile probation budget was spent on supportive services for young people. Less than 2%. So we can spend all of this money on GPS monitors. We can spend all of this money paying probation officers and court staff, but they spent less than 2% of their budget on actual support for young people. Lawyers should be advocating for alternatives and finding resources. I know a lot of people always say, well, we don't have those resources. Yeah, Philly has created our own network to where there's resources there. The people are there in your community. They may not be able to serve thousands of people at one time, but these resources are in our communities and we need to utilize them and partner with them and get them more funding. We need funders to invest in community solutions, and we need the family and community to reduce reliance on probation and rely more heavily on community. And so, what you can do is advocate for alternatives, challenge the status quo, shift your practice, fund community organizations, and of course, learn more by joining our coalition, JPAC. And so the role of JPAC is going to be to build a national movement to center youth voices and experiences, highlight community-based solutions, co-create campaigns for legislative action, expose the harms of probation with youth-led research, and release data and information to inform this work and the field. And so, in closing, we will say that we don't need to fix probation, we need to dismantle it completely. We need to be investing in the things that work, and we know what works because we see it every single day. We need to challenge and address structural and systemic racism. And yeah, Philly is one example of that future that we are building. And from here, we will take it to, I will stop share and we will take it to Dr. Shervington and Iman Shervington for the last part of our webinar.
Thank you very much, Kendra and James. We are very honored and grateful to be here, and I will go ahead and bring up the presentation now. And as mentioned before, we're going to jump right in. Our role is focusing on narrative change and looking at how narrative change could impact. We're in the how place of this presentation, how we are able to shift narratives, look at things differently, impact systems change, behavior change, policy change, etc. And so you heard our bios, our background. It's always good to hear that folks have a base in public health, but then are also doing work in other places, Kendra. And so this is the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies, that we are a community-based public health nonprofit, originally started in New Orleans, Louisiana, but we've expanded outside of New Orleans, but still with a foothold here in New Orleans. And we do different types of community-engaged research, media. Our main topics are that we focus on resilience and mental health, maternal and child health, adolescent health, healing justice, but we've dipped into very differing areas of the public health sphere. So starting us off with thinking about what narrative change is, as I was on this call, something came to me that I hadn't thought about before, but that is that narrative change is a bit of a mentality. I mentioned the range of areas that we've worked on within the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies. And one thing I was thinking about is how we've infused narrative change work into different aspects of our work, sometimes without thinking about it, but the goal here is to remind us that actually we should be strategic about it. But even thinking of a project, we're currently involved in a national study where we created a film, and the original request, because we did a lot of comprehensive sexuality education work in New Orleans, the original in Louisiana, the request was to look at how we could create a pregnancy prevention film for youth that are impacted by the juvenile justice system, whether they've been in the system, out of the system, at risk. And so instead of just looking just at pregnancy prevention, focusing on that, what we were looking at is what is the backstory of this young person? How would someone be in this position? What is happening in their family? What is happening in their community? What is happening on a larger scale? And we did a lot of formative research. Every draft of the script that I worked on, we would share it with youth that were in the juvenile system here in New Orleans, youth that had been connected to the system previously but were out of the system. We had a lot of feedback because we wanted to include youth voice. We did a pilot with youth that were at an alternative high school in New Orleans. So a lot of the things that you will hear us talking about, that also infused its way into another type of programming that wasn't just a narrative change project. And so I introduced that to think about how you can adopt this as a mentality as you go broader into the work that you do. And the reason why I think that this is so important is that story is so key to who we are, to how we see ourselves, how we move through our days, the stories we tell about ourselves, the stories we receive, whether passively or actively. Narratives are so key to how we identify and what we see, especially if we're looking at things in a moral, non-moral way within our society. So, how are we changing those narratives that are problematic? How are we shifting where the power is lying and who is controlling the narrative? What is the epistemic justice that we are able to provide? How are we advocating for more equity, bridging those gaps, as the last presentation was showing? And how are we able to do that through story, through authenticity, and shake up and revolutionize things, shake up the status quo? So, this is a definition that we're going to kind of base upon when we're thinking about what narrative change is. And I will go into some areas that you may want to focus on when you're thinking about how do I even tackle this? What do I want to look at? So, first, we'll talk about narrative levels, and it helps you to kind of couch your efforts in what level of narrative am I focusing on? So, am I looking at somebody's individual story? And also, let me just say that, as mentioned, narrative change usually is going to be a strategy. So, you want to think about different layers. So, you might be doing things that look at the story level, sharing stories of young people that have, like, for example, the lovely report that you all are going to be able to access soon, examples and feedback from young people that have been through probation, being able to have their voice heard when previously it was not heard. But then outside of the story, there's also a broader narrative. What is this story couched within? And even outside of that, there's a meta narrative, and that's usually our myths, our larger ways of looking at society, for each country, for each city, for each neighborhood, that could change. For different communities, that could be different. But there are these broader meta narratives that all of these things are working within as well. So, an example that I could give here is if there's an individual story of somebody, the hardships that they're going to, the situation that they're dealing with, how does this fit into a broader narrative? So, I will read these pieces to give an example. A man of Honduran descent has been living in LA for over 30 years and has a green card. He lives with his wife and children who were born and raised in LA, as well as his two grandchildren who he reads stories to almost every night. He's had a variety of odd jobs throughout his life, and his most recent job is at a restaurant in East LA, where he's worked for nearly 10 years. Last week, on his way to work, ICE agents chased him down at the gas station and unlawfully detained him without allowing him the right to counsel or proving that he committed a crime. So that is an example of someone painting somebody's individual story with the goal of catalyzing something, activating some type of action from sharing this story. If you'll note, I tried to not have an example that's just cut and dry, bare bones. Someone who has a family where he reads bedtime stories to his children, humanizing, adding more layers to the story than what we typically might see when we're looking at a case of this sort, which nowadays you will see in different ways, but usually how things are reported, they're not giving you the full backstory. A larger narrative that fits within is the reality that the quote unquote American dream is not true for everyone. It changes depending on what your background, where your American dream starts, where and when. That's not equal. Is no equity within this situation. But then there's an even broader meta narrative that's looking at ideals within the US of exceptionalism, issues around individualism, xenophobia, and racism. All of these other things are at play as we're looking at this story. So when you're thinking about the narrative that you're attempting to change, think about all of these layers and where you can find the weak points, what you can focus your efforts on to be able to change that narrative. So another thing we'll focus on are what are some of the functions? What are you trying to specifically do with your narrative change work? So first off, and there could be other options. These are just a really easy way to kind of look at the ways that this can happen. Are you creating something new? Is it that people have not heard about this lens and view of being able to talk about this issue? And this just it doesn't exist. People aren't talking about it from this angle. So are you creating something that didn't exist before? Are you countering something? Is there a narrative that you find problematic, that is unfavorable, that is inaccurate in any way, and you want to provide a counterexample that can hopefully undo what that or the previous narrative was? Is there a narrative that exists, but just people don't really know about it that much? So you're trying to amplify a narrative that is out there, increase the audience, increase the reach, maybe use different messengers, have different people and different channels, but do you want this to expand? Are you reframing an issue? Is there a problem with how this is looked at? So, for example, what I just spoke about, that sometimes when we're talking about folks that we're quote unquote criminalizing, we're not giving their full backstory. We're not giving the why they are in the space that they are in their life. So, is it that the frame is problematic and we need to adjust how we're looking at this issue? Or is there already something out there, but we want to just attach something else and connect something else to this issue? Would that also be helpful? I will note you can have a campaign, you can have a narrative change project that uses multiple tactics. We're not saying you have to stick to one tactic, but it sometimes helps you to think and share out how you want to focus on the function of what you're doing. So we're going to move to our first question. And there was a poll. If you are using the poll feature, some people put things in the chat, that's totally fine. If you're using the poll feature, it'll be the same. If you join by web, if you use the QR code or you text, it'll be the same one. And our first question, just thinking in general, if you're thinking about the topic and theme of revolutionizing probation, if you were to create a campaign tomorrow, how would you most like your narrative to function? Would you want to create something new, counter something that's unfavorable, amplify a narrative that hasn't been pushed up, doesn't have a big enough audience yet, reframing how we're looking at the issue, or would you like to attach something new to a narrative? So I'll give it a second to see what some of these responses are. I love seeing how it adjusts. And the reframing is interesting, I think, looking at how we started off and how Hedgie spoke to what the stated goals are supposed to be and then what the reality for people are. And so, is it that a lot of society is interpreting that, oh, it's happening as it's meant to, because this is what it's supposed to be, rehabilitating, doing all of these things. They're not hearing the reality of what's going on. So, is it that we need to shift the frame so that people are seeing what it's really like for young people? So I'm going to move us to the next thing, but I appreciate this because it's great to see kind of the key tactics that might be helpful at this moment. So then, all right, I want to change a narrative. What am I trying to change? Where do I start? So some of the things you can look at, and again, there are other options, but these are just a few. Language. What are the language that we are using? And I think we're in a moment in our society where people are starting to really think about language and how that can dehumanize people, how it can put people in boxes and binaries, how it's not looking at the full person and being very clear that words mean things. So are there terms that are being used that are problematic that we want to start pushing alternatives instead? Are there new stories that we need to be telling? Are the stories that people haven't heard about what this is truly like not out there, but they're just getting their ideas of what it is? Do we need to go deeper and share new stories in this situation? Whose voices are we prioritizing? Are the wrong people the ones we're hearing from, flat out? Are we not hearing from the people that can really speak to the issue, that are able to talk about what the experience is like for them? Can we elevate different voices and change who we're seeing as the authority on this issue? Also, again, as mentioned, what is the frame? So, a lot of what we saw in the last poll was talking about reframing. So, then that's important. Are we able to change the frame and how we're looking at the issue? And then lastly, are there core messages that we can be using? There are some folks that you'll watch maybe, sometimes you'll see a mashup of different news reports where you hear the same people across the country using the same terminology, and you're like, they got their messaging down. Is that problematic? And can we start pushing out a shared message that can land and stick with people? And I will do a plug for JPAC. Maybe that's a space to start thinking about alternatives for messaging and be able to have a group where you're able to then disseminate that out and spread so that you can change the messages that are out there. So going to our next poll, again, you can use the chat feature, you can use the poll on your phone or your device. But the next question, assuming you were to do a campaign now, something narrative change project, what element would you most want to change? Is it the language that's used, the stories that are being told, who the voices are that are seen as authorities on the issue, the frames once again, or the common messages? And I'll give it a second for these to land. I like seeing the voice. That's often one of the issues. Ooh, and the stories. And those often go hand in hand. So the stories that are being told, if they come from authentic voices, they come from people that are really living through these experiences, then that can make such a difference and show people the reality in ways that they may not hearing it from two layers removed. So again, for the sake of time, I'm going to move us forward, but thank you again for participating in this poll. And I was so excited that it moved so smoothly last time. And now, of course, this time the advanced share is a little harder. Let me see if I can get it to go forward. Apologies. I may have to exit out and come back in. I'm going to go ahead and just do that quickly. All right. So now we're going to look a bit about audience. And audience is so core because we need to think deeply about who we are trying to impact, behavior change, etc. And so I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Shervington now to speak about psychological frameworks and how that can impact how we think about audience. Before I get to you, Dr. Shervington, I just want to kind of point out that one of the things to think about is, are you speaking to the choir, or are you speaking to people that are somewhat familiar with the issue, those that don't really know much, those that maybe haven't heard about it? When you're thinking about the audience, think about their readiness as well. And then we're going to go into the psychological frameworks.
Thank you so much. It's really such an honor to follow you, Iman, and to also be on a panel where I feel the love and compassion for all children. And so I'm going to dedicate my little piece. Did not come up in my bio is that I oftentimes work with juvenile defense attorneys looking at the trauma history of young people in the system, acknowledging the pain and the suffering of these young people, and of course, the pain and the suffering of who might have been victimized by their actions. I want to also say, as a psychiatrist, that one of the reasons I'm so honored to be here is that I feel that within the medical field, we talk about the school to prison pipeline. As a psychiatrist over the years, I have observed how we have contributed through the healthcare to prison pipeline. When there are young people before us, young people living in very toxic situations, we know about ACEs, we know about community conditions, we know about the society in which we live that oftentimes unfairly treats young people. One of them said to me, "Why is it that my zip code where I live is going to define my future?" And so I want to acknowledge that, within this level of suffering as mental health clinicians, many of the times we've done a very bad job in terms of being slow and lazy in the way we see the trauma in kids. We don't diagnose, we give them behavioral disorders, conduct disorders, ADHD. Many of the kids that I have seen, what's happening with them is that they experience very, very toxic, traumatic situations and they receive no treatment, no supports. I'm so excited to see the work that Yale Philly is doing as one way that's going to help to dismantle that. So let me get to what I'm supposed to talk about, which is how do we think about the audience? Who are we trying to persuade? And it's really important to remember that actually the so-called father of advertisement was Sigmund Freud's nephew, who read a lot of what Sigmund Freud was talking about, the mind, from the conscious to the unconscious mind. And he recognized that what really you can persuade people by understanding what their inner life is like and how do you motivate them for change. And he's well known for the campaign that was to get women, supposedly it was to promote smoking in women as something that is feminist, but that we know ultimately turned out to be something that was very, very harmful. Next slide, Amen. So I just want to throw in real quickly that as we think about our audience, the individual, who are the people, and I love that our prior speaker talked about systems are made up by individuals and the behaviors that come from the collective. And so when we think about individual behavior, just want to throw out Carl Jung's theory that we all have a personal unconscious and we have a collective unconscious. And of course, we operate from our conscious mind where we're aware of the environment and how we're interacting in it. But deep inside us, in our psyche, there is a unconscious, the very personal one with our biographical desires, the things that we repress. And then what Carl Jung is noted for is talking about a deeper layer to that unconscious, where we carry the archetypes. And it is within the archetypes that happen very early in our childhood that we actually carry a lot of the positivity, a lot of what it is that's good about us as a human family that has made us survive to where we are now. And so when we think about developing the psychological framework within which we're going to talk about narrative change for societal good, we need to recognize that most people's behavior are driven by the unconscious desires and irrational impulses, by their unconscious desires and irrational impulses. And we also know that that is very much, our mind is very much shaped by sociocultural identity beliefs and norms. We know that people are usually motivated by previous experiences of pleasure, and that most of us are trying to avoid things that create frustration in our life. And that it's through trying to filter the present through the past around which there was pleasure or unpleasure that we tend to make decisions. If we're going to develop psychological frameworks, I think it's really, really important to understand what Carl Jung brought to our attention, that the archetypes that are deep, deep be below even our subconscious, the more personal, biographical level of our unconscious. And that is that it is in there that he felt that the emotional blueprint for us as a human family that connects us all to the human condition, no matter where we are in it, on the side of moral, good or bad, there is deep within us a place, a place that connects us to the goodness of humanity. Next slide. And so, as we're thinking about how we're going to change the narrative, the one for societal good, the one that will support our children, the kids that I saw who did not receive the successful supports from very early on in their life, as we're trying to create a narrative that this is our responsibility as a society. How do we try to better understand what are some of these sociocultural shadows, the places in which we are blocking that which creates discomfort in our lives? Can we try to figure out how we can motivate people for good, to enhance the core self that I think we all believe it's innate to all of us as human beings, that most of us as human beings are born to be curious, to be courageous, to be connected, to be compassionate with each other? Can we create stories that tap into that? And that is where, when we talk about the unconscious collective, where there are archetypal patterns that we have seen through human life, through all human beings in multiple societies, that we have the capacity for innocence, for love and compassion, and within the archetypes that exist below this level of consciousness, can our stories connect with that? And oftentimes when we're trying to change and manipulate people's behaviors and persuade them for the good, not for some selfish reason, the archetypes that are seen to be the most powerful for us is that of the hero and the divine child. And because we're a collective community, when we talk about a hero and the journey towards good, oftentimes that is a community of people, not just one person heroically making change, but people who come together, like what is happening, the energy here, the energy that started at Yea Philly to do something good for children. Oftentimes that's the hero's journey, and that's people as human beings tapping into our purpose, the divine purpose that exists in all of us, if we would try to tap into it, if we had the capacity or the belief that within all of us there is goodness. And I just want to connect to what Iman is going to say next, is that this is why in New Orleans, when kids were suffering and struggling after a major disaster with no resources depending on your zip code, we started at iWest a campaign saying our kids, they are not bad, they're sad. And in my work in the system, the kids are on one side of the trauma, whether they are, and I saw someone put in the chat that we're not victims, and I know we're not victims, we're survivors. And then there are some kids who perpetrate. So I'm going to stop here, and Iman, please take it. I'm sorry I stole 2 minutes of your time.
No, I know we're getting close to the end and close to the Q&A. So I just want to quickly give some last pieces. One thing to think about with narrative change work is often a question, well, how do you know it's effective? What's working? How do we measure narrative change? And so just give a couple of things that you can look at. And also in the follow-up, we'll have links to documents, especially the document that we pulled a lot of this from, so you can go deeper into these topics there. But some of the things that you can look at to measure, or just to observe where the change is happening. Are you seeing changes in attitudes and beliefs around the issue? Are behaviors changing? That can be individual behaviors, a system changing, et cetera. Again, speaking to systems, do you see institutions adopting new ways? Are they changing? Is the way that media and culture is talking about the issue, who they're including as the messengers, how it is being framed changing? Even within organizations, is the capacity changing to see the issue differently to move things forward? Because I know we're talking about systems change, but a lot of time the narrative we need to change within ourselves. It's within our own minds and hearts before we even start moving outwards. Are you seeing big P or little p policy changes? It can start small and it can build bigger, but incrementally, are you seeing things be different? You can also note the reach that can be social analytics, it can be billboard views, things of that sort. And are you seeing our behaviors changing? Are we getting rid of probation and moving to something way better? Are our social norms adapting? Those are some of the things that we can look at. So, lastly, when you're thinking about this, a core thing to think about is what is the dissemination? How are we getting the word out there? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I'm going to go into our last word cloud. And that is to give us a little like action to move us forward. What do you feel is stopping you from changing the narrative about juvenile probation? I'm going to open up this cloud. You can take that question in any direction you want to go. But what are the impediments? What makes this work difficult? Not surprising there. We'll start with politics and see what else we have. And again, you can put it in the poll or you can do the chat. Either way, huge one, funding. Fear. That goes back to some of the things that Dr. Shervington was speaking about and exploring what is some of the unconscious or cautious things that are causing that fear. And if we're able to maybe understand that, then maybe we can figure out the counter narrative or what else can help to undo that fear and be able to make space to open up change. Thank you. This is very helpful. So again, because of time, I'm going to move us forward. But it's really good to see where knowing where we need to start kind of helps here. So the last thing I will say, oh, here we go. Got it. The last thing I'll say, this is for yourself. You don't have to put it in the chat. This is something to hold on to. And actually, on a previous call where we were planning for this event, the quote that I loved the most was that the youth will remember the people that stood up for them forever. And I forget who said it. I feel like it was you, Kendra, but I can't remember. But the core of that is even sometimes I think this work can feel very difficult and like you're just punching against a wall and nothing's happening. But you may be that one person that does that little thing that makes that change. So, who are some of those allies that, as you're thinking about revolutionizing probation, promoting alternatives that are healthier and better for our young people, who are some of those bright spots that you can point towards? So, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share and transition us over to our Q&A. It looks like, oh, the queue, there's nothing in the Q&A queue, but if there were any questions, I don't know if anyone brought anything up that was from the chat. Otherwise, I'll pass it over to Marianne since we're close to time.
Thank you so much, Iman and Dr. Shervington. We're so grateful to you and so grateful to all of our speakers today for this incredible conversation about transforming juvenile probation. And so we would be really grateful to all of you if you would fill in our quick 3-question survey, which will come out to you. And if you could help us really think about pathways to move forward through JPAC. We want to thank you all for joining us today, and we're excited to share with you an early access link to our report, which will come out in the next few weeks. You'll see the report and the executive summary. Please join us and stay up to date with what's happening in JPAC by joining the listserv. There's a link for that in the chat as well. And you can learn more about JPAC on our website. We're also looking for youth artists, and we have an application for you to share out with young people that you're working with. Again, that's in the chat. And we're excited to share these pieces with you and be in conversation with you as we move forward. And again, just to round out this conversation, we're so excited to be in this space and have an opportunity to talk about the history and context and origins of juvenile probation, and that quote that Hedgie shared from Brian Stevenson about how it remains difficult to move forward if we remain burdened by the history that we haven't spoken of. So really just understanding the context of that. And then thinking about, yeah, Philly and investing in what works and seeing that as an example that we would like to see it across the nation. We have this beautiful example of restorative justice practices and circles and their true connection and relationships with young people that we hope through JPAC, help spread. So we invest in the future thriving of all young people. And that we use stories and narratives to help shape not just our own identities, but the identity of this nation, to transform it into what we hope will be a future where young people can thrive in supportive communities. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to have a slide that we put up that's going to have all these links as well, but we hope you've grabbed what you can from the chat, and we look forward to seeing you this summer for next part of Revolutionizing Probation. Thank you so much.